The boy hadn't spoken a single word in 14 months, not since the day they lowered his mother into the frozen Wyoming ground. But on that windswept October evening in 1876, as his father prepared to send away the new teacher from Boston, 9-year-old Henry Mercer grabbed his father's calloused hand and whispered the first words that would change everything. "Don't let her go, Pa. I like her here." Those 8 words would bind 3 broken souls into something none of them had dared to hope for. A family forged not from blood, but from the courage to love again after unbearable loss. Stay with me, friends, as I share this remarkable story of healing and unexpected love on the American frontier. And before we begin, drop a comment below sharing where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across our beautiful world. The stagecoach lurched to a stop with a groan of wood and leather, sending up a cloud of dust that made Clara Whitfield's eyes water behind her traveling veil. Through the haze, she could make out the ramshackle buildings of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, a town that seemed to huddle against the vast, unforgiving landscape like a child seeking comfort from an indifferent parent. October wind cut through her wool traveling dress as if it were made of paper, carrying with it the scent of sage, horse sweat, and something else, the raw, untamed essence of a land that had never known the gentle touch of civilization she'd left behind in Boston. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as the gravel road beneath them. "The Mercer Ranch wagon should be along shortly." Clara gathered her courage along with her skirts, accepting the driver's weathered hand as she descended from the coach. Her boots, polished leather that had seemed so practical in Boston, met the dusty ground of a world that suddenly felt impossibly foreign. She was 24 years old, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and had traveled 2,000 miles to teach one small boy who, according to the terse telegram she'd received 3 months prior, required immediate educational attention. "Miss Whitfield?" The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, like distant thunder. Clara turned to find herself looking up and up at a man who seemed carved from the very mountains that dominated the horizon. Jonah Mercer stood 6 feet 3 inches in his worn boots, his shoulders broad enough to block out the late afternoon sun. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as winter storms and holding a weariness that seemed to run soul deep. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending her gloved hand with the confidence she'd practiced on the long journey west. "I'm pleased to finally meet you." He looked at her hand for a moment, as if he'd forgotten such civilities existed, then engulfed it briefly in his own calloused grip. "The ranch is an hour's ride. We should go before dark." No pleasantries, no welcome. Just the bare minimum of words necessary to convey information. Clara had been warned by the placement agency that Jonah Mercer was a man of few words since his wife's passing, but she hadn't expected this wall of silence. As he loaded her trunk onto the wagon with an ease that made the heavy case seem weightless, Clara studied him from beneath her bonnet. His dark hair, touched with premature gray at the temples, needed cutting. His clothes were clean but mended in places, the careful darning work of someone who'd learned necessity rather than been born to it. Everything about him spoke of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. "Is Henry with you?" she asked as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. Something flickered across his features, pain, perhaps, or worry. "He doesn't come to town anymore." "I see." She didn't really, but something in his tone warned against further questions. Not yet. The ride to the ranch was conducted in almost complete silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Clara found herself stealing glances at the man beside her, trying to reconcile this taciturn rancher with the elegant handwriting of the letters that had arranged her employment. Those letters had spoken of a boy who'd shown remarkable intelligence before tragedy struck, who'd devoured books the way other children devoured penny candy. "Your letter mentioned that Henry was 9, she ventured as they crested a hill. 10, come December. And he's had no formal schooling since," she caught herself before saying, "since his mother died," but Jonah finished the thought anyway. "Since Emma passed, 14 months ago." His hands tightened on the reins. He knew his letters and numbers before. Emma taught him. After she died, he just stopped. Stopped learning. Stopped everything. Talking, playing. Sometimes I wonder if he's even stopped feeling. The admission seemed to surprise him, and he fell back into silence as if the words had escaped without permission. The Mercer Ranch came into view as they descended into a valley, and Clara's breath caught despite herself. It wasn't the grandest spread she'd seen on her journey west, but there was something achingly beautiful about it. The main house sat solid and welcoming against a backdrop of cottonwoods whose leaves had turned gold in the autumn chill. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see cattle dotting the distant pastures like scattered seeds. "It's lovely," she said softly. Jonah looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time. Emma chose this spot, said it reminded her of a painting she'd seen once of paradise. Before Clara could respond, the front door of the house opened and a small figure appeared on the porch. Henry Mercer was small for his age, with his father's dark hair but finer features that must have come from his mother. He stood perfectly still, watching their approach with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Hello, Henry," Clara called out warmly as Jonah brought the wagon to a stop. "I'm Miss Whitfield. I've come a very long way to meet you." The boy said nothing. He simply turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind him like a question mark. "He won't answer," Jonah said quietly, lifting her trunk from the wagon. "Haven't heard his voice since the day we buried her. The doc says there's nothing wrong with him physically. The words are just locked inside somehow." Clara climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her skirts and squaring her shoulders. "Well then, we'll just have to find the key, won't we?" Something shifted in Jonah's expression, surprise, perhaps, or maybe the faintest glimmer of hope. "The agency said you taught difficult children before." "I've taught grieving children before, Mr. Mercer. There's a difference." She met his gaze steadily. "Your son isn't difficult. He's hurt, and hurt can be healed, given time and patience." "Ma'am, I should tell you straight. The last 3 teachers didn't last more than a month. One left after 2 weeks." Said the boy was touched in the head, that the silence was unnatural. "Then they were fools," Clara said crisply. "Now, if you'll show me to my room, I'd like to freshen up before supper. And Mr. Mercer, I'll need you to tell me about Emma. Not now, but soon. Henry needs to know it's safe to remember her, and he'll take his cues from you." Jonah stared at her for a long moment. This slight woman from Boston who spoke of his deepest pain as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a burden to be endured. "You're not what I expected, Miss Whitfield." "Good," she said, picking up her smaller carpet bag. "Expectations are often limitations in disguise. Shall we go in? I'd like to see the schoolroom if you've prepared one." The house was exactly what Clara had imagined, well built and clean, but lacking those small touches that spoke of a woman's presence. The furniture was good quality, likely ordered from Denver or even further east, but there were no curtains at the windows, no flowers on the table, no samplers on the walls. It was a house that had forgotten how to be a home. "Your room," Jonah said, opening a door at the top of the stairs, "was Emma's sewing room. I hope it's suitable." The room was small but pleasant, with a window that looked out over the ranch and the mountains beyond. A narrow bed with a colorful quilt, clearly Emma's work, stood against one wall, and a simple desk and chair had been placed near the window. "It's perfect," Clara said, setting down her bag. "And the schoolroom?" "Downstairs, what used to be Emma's parlor. I've put in a table and chairs, and there's a shelf of books." He paused in the doorway, seeming to struggle with something. "Miss Whitfield, I need you to understand. I'm not looking for miracles. If you can just teach him to read and write better, do his sums, that's enough. Don't feel you have to fix what's broken in him." Clara turned from the window where she'd been admiring the view. "Mr. Mercer, in my experience, children aren't things that break. They're more like plants that get frostbitten. With warmth and care, they can bloom again. Now, what time is supper?" "An hour. I'll leave you to settle in." After he left, Clara unpacked methodically, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the small shelf above the washstand. She'd brought little with her: some books, her mother's silver brush and mirror, a photograph of her parents, and tucked carefully between layers of tissue paper, a music box that played a Chopin waltz. It had been her grandmother's, and she'd brought it thinking it might help reach a silent child. When she descended for supper, she found Jonah and Henry already seated at the large kitchen table. A woman she hadn't expected stood at the stove, broad-faced and capable-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "This is Mrs. Rodriguez," Jonah said. "She comes in to cook and clean 3 times a week. Maria, Miss Whitfield, the new teacher." Mrs. Rodriguez looked Clara up and down with shrewd dark eyes. "From Boston," Mr. Jonah says. "You ever been out west before?" "No, ma'am. This is my first time beyond the Mississippi." "Well, hope you last longer than the others. The boy needs steadying." She set a pot of stew on the table with a thump. "And so does his father, if you ask me, which nobody does." "Maria," Jonah said warningly. "Just speaking truth," the woman muttered, but she smiled at Clara. "You're too skinny. Eat plenty. The winter here will freeze the meat right off your bones if you're not careful." The meal progressed in relative silence. Clara tried several gentle conversational gambits with Henry, asking about his favorite foods, if he liked animals, what he could see from his bedroom window. The boy listened. She could tell by the way his eyes tracked to her face, but he offered no response, verbal or otherwise. He ate mechanically, small, neat bites, his table manners impeccable. "Your mother taught you beautiful manners, Henry," Clara observed. "She must have been a very special lady." The boy's fork stilled for just a moment, then resumed its journey to his mouth. "But Jonah." Jonah set down his own fork with careful precision. "She was," he said quietly. She was sunshine in this place. Taught Henry his letters at that very table. Used to sing while she cooked." He seemed to catch himself, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "I apologize. You don't need to hear—" "Actually, I do," Clara interrupted gently. "How can I teach Henry if I don't know who he was before? Tell me about the boy who loved his mother's songs." Henry's eyes darted between them, wary as a wild animal. Jonah was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "He used to help her in the garden, knew all the names of the flowers, even the Latin ones from her books. He'd bring her bouquets of wild flowers, all carefully arranged. Had an eye for beauty, like her." "Did you keep any of her garden?" Clara asked. "No." The word was sharp, final. "It died with her. I couldn't tend it and run the ranch both." "I understand." Clara turned to Henry. "Perhaps you could show me where it was tomorrow. I'd like to learn about the flowers that grow here. The landscape is so different from Boston. I saw some lovely purple blooms on the ride here. I'd love to know what they're called." Henry looked at her for a long moment, then deliberately turned his gaze to his plate. After supper, Jonah showed her the schoolroom while Henry disappeared upstairs. Emma's parlor had been transformed into a functional classroom. A large slate board on one wall, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding perhaps 30 books, and a window that looked out onto what must have once been the garden. Now it was just a patch of dried earth and withered stalks. "Will this do?" Jonah asked. "It's wonderful. May I?" She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. McGuffey Readers, a worn copy of Aesop's Fables, Hawthorne's Wonder Book, several volumes of poetry, and surprisingly, Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle. "Emma's," Jonah said, noticing her attention. "She was always reading, always curious about the world, said she wanted Henry to know there was more beyond these mountains. And now he won't even look at them?" "Won't touch them. Won't touch anything that was hers." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Doc Morrison says it's his way of grieving, but it's been over a year. How long can a boy grieve?" "As long as he needs to, Mr. Mercer. Grief isn't something you complete, like a chore. It's something you learn to carry." She pulled out the volume of Aesop. "We'll start with stories he might remember from before. Familiar, but not too painful." "You really think you can reach him?" Clara met his desperate gaze. "I think he's already listening. He just needs to know it's safe to answer." That night, Clara lay in the narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of the house settling. Somewhere in this same house, a little boy lay silent in his bed, wrapped in grief like a thick blanket. And down the hall, a father kept his own vigil against the darkness. She rose and went to her trunk, pulling out the music box. By moonlight, she wound the key and let the delicate melody fill the room. The Chopin waltz drifted through the thin walls, a gentle invasion of beauty into a house that had forgotten such things existed. She heard footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside her door, lingered, then moved on. Whether it was father or son, she couldn't tell, but someone had been listening. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn, dressing quickly in her simplest day dress, a practical brown wool that wouldn't show dirt. She'd learned from her previous positions that children, especially troubled ones, responded better to someone who didn't seem afraid of getting messy. She found Jonah already in the kitchen, standing at the stove with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the rising sun painting the mountains pink and gold. "You're up early, Miss Whitfield." "I've always been an early riser. May I?" She gestured to the coffee pot. He poured her a cup, his movements careful and precise. "Henry usually comes down around 7. Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't come today, so breakfast is just bread and jam, maybe some eggs." "I can cook, Mr. Mercer. It was part of my training. A governess should be useful in all aspects of household management." "You're not a governess. You're a teacher." "I'm whatever Henry needs me to be." She sipped the coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe, as her father would have said. "Tell me, what did he love before, besides the garden and books?" Jonah considered. "Horses. He was learning to ride. Had a little pinto mare named Buttercup, still in the stable, though he won't go near her now." "Interesting. What else?" "Drawing. Emma taught him. She had some talent with watercolors." He gestured toward the parlor. "There's a whole box of her art supplies in the closet. Haven't had the heart to move them." "May I use them? For lessons?" "If you think it'll help." He set down his cup. "I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture. I'll be back by noon." "We'll be fine," Clara assured him. After he left, Clara explored the kitchen, finding eggs, bacon, flour, and to her delight, fresh apples. By the time Henry appeared in the doorway at 7:15, she had apple pancakes browning on the griddle, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and comfort. "Good morning, Henry," she said cheerfully, not turning from the stove. "I hope you're hungry. I've made far too much for just myself." She heard the scrape of a chair. He'd sat down. Progress. She placed a plate in front of him, golden pancakes dotted with caramelized apples, a small pitcher of maple syrup beside it. "My grandmother's recipe." She said the secret was to add a touch of vanilla to the batter. Henry stared at the plate, then slowly picked up his fork. The first bite was tentative, but she saw his eyes widen slightly. He ate steadily after that, clearing his plate. "Would you like more?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded, the first direct response she'd gotten. As she served him another pancake, she said casually, "After breakfast, I thought we might start with some reading. I found a wonderful book of Aesop's fables. Do you know the story of the crow and the pitcher? It's about being clever when things seem impossible." Henry's eyes flicked to her face, interested despite himself. "The crow was so thirsty," Clara continued, sitting down with her own plate, "but the water in the pitcher was too low for him to reach. He could have given up, decided it was hopeless, but instead he started dropping pebbles into the pitcher, one by one. Slowly the water rose until he could drink. Sometimes, Henry, the smallest actions can solve the biggest problems." After breakfast, they moved to the schoolroom. Clara had arranged it carefully. The table positioned to catch the morning light, paper and pencils laid out, the book of fables open to an illustration of a magnificent lion. "Now," she said, taking her seat, "I know you can read. Your father told me your mother taught you, but I don't know what level you've reached. So I'm going to read aloud and you follow along. If you see a word you don't know, just point to it, and I'll explain." She began with the lion and the mouse, her voice warm and expressive. She watched Henry from the corner of her eye. He was following along, his finger tracking under the words. The little mouse said, "Please, great lion, spare me, and someday I may be able to help you." The lion laughed at such a notion. How could a tiny mouse help the king of beasts? Clara paused. "Have you ever felt too small to help, Henry?" He looked up at her, something flickering in his dark eyes. Then, deliberately, he pointed to a word on the page. "Gratitude," Clara said. "It means being thankful, showing appreciation." The mouse felt gratitude when the lion spared him. Henry nodded, the gesture small but definite. They continued this way for an hour, Clara reading, Henry pointing to words he wanted explained. Not a game, she realized, but a test. He was seeing if she would be patient, if she would respect his silence while still engaging with him. "Shall we try some arithmetic?" she asked eventually. Henry's face fell slightly, clearly not his favorite subject. "What if," Clara said, pulling out the box of watercolors she'd retrieved from the closet, "we made it more interesting? We could paint the numbers, give them colors and personalities." Henry stared at the paint box as if it might bite him. These had been his mother's. "I know," Clara said softly. "These were special to her, but I believe, she'd want them used. Art supplies are meant to create beauty, not gather dust. We don't have to if you're not ready, but they're here if you change your mind." She turned to the slate board instead, drawing simple equations. "Let's start with something easy. If you have 7 cattle and 3 wander off, how many remain?" Henry picked up his pencil and wrote, 4. "Excellent. Now, if those 3 wandering cattle each had a calf with them, how many animals wandered off in total?" He considered, then wrote, 6. "Perfect. You're very quick with numbers." A tiny smile, barely there, gone in an instant, but she saw it. They worked until noon, taking breaks to stretch and look out the window. Clara pointed out birds, clouds, the way the light changed on the mountains. She talked constantly, but never demanded verbal responses, accepting nods, head shakes, pointed fingers, and written answers as valid communication. When Jonah returned for lunch, he found them at the table, Henry drawing a picture of a horse while Clara mixed colors, showing him how to make different shades of brown. "Pa," Henry said. The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. Jonah froze in the doorway, his face draining of color. "Henry?" he whispered. But the boy had gone rigid, dropping the brush, his face crumpling in what looked like terror at his own voice. Before either adult could react, he bolted from the room, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. "Henry!" Jonah started after him, but Clara caught his arm. "Let him go," she said gently. He scared himself. He needs a moment to understand that nothing bad happened because he spoke. But he said, "I know." She squeezed his arm. "It's a good sign, truly. The dam is beginning to crack. But we can't force it. Let me go to him in a few minutes." Jonah sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I haven't heard his voice in so long, I'd started to forget what it sounded like." Clara busied herself cleaning up the watercolors, giving him time to compose himself. "He was painting horses. I think he misses riding. I could bring Buttercup closer to the house, maybe. That would be wonderful." She set the supplies aside. "I'll go check on him now." She found Henry's room by the muffled crying coming from behind the door. She knocked gently. "Henry, it's Miss Whitfield. I'm not coming in unless you want me to, but I'm going to sit right here outside your door for a bit, all right? Sometimes it helps not to be completely alone." She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and began to talk softly. "When I was 12, my father died. He'd been sick for a long time, so we knew it was coming, but that didn't make it easier. For 3 months after, I couldn't say his name, couldn't even think it without crying. My mother was worried, but my grandmother, she was wise. She said grief was like water behind a dam. You could hold it back for a while, but eventually it had to flow or it would break you apart." The crying had quieted to sniffles. "One day, I was in the garden and I saw his favorite roses blooming, and suddenly I said, 'Papa loved those,' just like that. And instead of the world ending, my mother smiled and said, 'Yes, he did.' And we talked about him for the first time in months." The door opened a crack. One dark eye peered out. "It's scary when the words come back, isn't it?" Clara said gently. "Because if you start talking, you might have to talk about her, about how much you miss her." The door opened wider. Henry stood there, face blotchy, nose running. "Come here," Clara said, opening her arms. He fell into them, this 10-year-old boy who'd been trying so hard to be strong. She held him while he cried, not the silent tears of before, but real gasping sobs that shook his whole body. "Ma," he gasped out between sobs. "Ma's gone." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Jonah appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the sound. Clara met his eyes over Henry's head, saw the tears tracking down his weathered face. She nodded toward Henry, inviting him closer. Jonah knelt beside them, his large hand tentative on his son's back. "I miss her too, son." every day. Henry turned from Clara to his father, and Jonah gathered him up, the boy's arms wrapping around his neck. "I'm sorry, Pa. I'm sorry I stopped talking." "No, no, son. Nothing to be sorry for. Nothing at all." Clara quietly stood and made her way downstairs, leaving father and son to their reunion. She busied herself in the kitchen, making tea, slicing bread, needing something to do with the emotions coursing through her. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived an hour later for her afternoon duties, finding Clara at the kitchen table with lesson plans. "The boy talked," the older woman said without preamble. "Saw Mr. Jonah carrying him to the barn. Heard them both chattering away like magpies." "Yes." "You did that?" "He did it himself. He just needed permission." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her shrewdly. "You're not like the others, those fancy city misses with their airs. You've known hurt yourself." "Haven't we all? Some more than others." The woman began kneading dough for dinner rolls. "You planning to stay, or you going to break their hearts, leaving like the others?" "I'm contracted for a year." "That's not what I asked." Clara met her gaze. "I don't abandon my students, Mrs. Rodriguez, ever." We'll see." As the afternoon wore on, Clara watched from the window as Jonah led Henry around the corral on Buttercup. The boy was talking animatedly, his hands flying as he described something. Jonah was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since she'd arrived. That evening, dinner was a revelation. Henry couldn't seem to stop talking, words tumbling over each other as if making up for 14 months of silence. "Miss Clara, did you know that horses can see almost all the way behind them? Only have a blind spot right behind their tail. And Buttercup remembers me. She nickered when she saw me, just like before. And Pa says maybe I can start riding again, real riding, not just in the corral. And did you see the hawk earlier? It was a red tail. Ma used to—" He stopped abruptly, face falling. "It's okay to talk about her," Jonah said gently. "Tell Miss Whitfield about the hawks." "Ma used to say they were good luck, said they watched over the ranch." Henry's voice was smaller now, but steady. "She knew all the birds, had a book with pictures." "I'd love to see that book," Clara said. "Maybe you could teach me about the birds here. We only had pigeons and sparrows in Boston." "Really? No hawks?" "None that I saw. Cities are different, all buildings and cobblestones." "Why'd you leave?" Henry asked with the directness of children. Clara considered her answer. "Sometimes, Henry, you know you're meant to be somewhere else. I loved Boston, but I felt called to come west, to teach. And I'm very glad I did, or I wouldn't have met you." After dinner, as had become her habit, Clara played the music box in her room. This time, footsteps stopped outside her door, and there was a knock. "Come in." It was both of them. Henry in his nightshirt, Jonah behind him. "That's pretty," Henry said, watching the little figures dance on top of the box. "Ma had one, but it broke." "Would you like to learn the song? I could teach you to play it on the piano." "We don't have a piano. Ma wanted one, but they're expensive and hard to transport," Jonah finished. "Maybe someday." "Well, we can still learn the melody. You can hum it, or we could find some other instrument. Does anyone play fiddle around here?" "Old Pete, one of the ranch hands," Jonah said. "Plays at the dances sometimes." "Perfect. Music lessons could be part of our curriculum." She looked at Henry. "Would you like that?" "Yes, ma'am. Yes, please, Miss Clara." After they left, Clara sat at her small desk, writing in her journal by lamplight. It had been an extraordinary day, a breakthrough she hadn't dared hope would come so soon. But she knew from experience that healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, quiet days, moments when the grief would surge back like a tide. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." It was Jonah, alone this time. "I wanted to thank you, what you did today." "I did nothing but give him space to be ready." "You did more than that." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, too large for the small room. The other teachers, they pushed, demanded he speak. One even tried to force him, said he was being willful. "Children aren't willful, Mr. Mercer. They're protective." Henry was protecting himself the only way he knew how. "You understand children." "I understand loss." She set down her pen. "My father when I was 12, as I told Henry. My mother 2 years ago. My fiancé in the war." "I didn't know you'd been engaged." 3 weeks before he left for Antietam. He never came back. She smiled sadly. So, yes, I understand why Henry stopped talking. Sometimes the words hurt too much. Is that why you came west? To escape the memories? No, to make new ones. She met his gaze. Your son is remarkable, Mr. Mercer. He's intelligent, sensitive, and stronger than you know. He'll heal from this, but he'll never forget her. That's not the goal. The goal is to help him carry the love without being crushed by the loss. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. You speak as if you've made that journey yourself. I'm still making it. We all are, in different ways. He shifted, seeming to want to say more, but finally just nodded. Good night, Miss Whitfield. Clara, she said impulsively. In private, you can call me Clara. Then I'm Jonah. He gave her a ghost of a smile. Good night, Clara. The weeks that followed Henry's breakthrough were like watching spring come to a frozen land. Slow, tentative, but undeniable. Clara established a routine that gave structure to their days while leaving room for the spontaneous moments where real learning happened. Every morning, she rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, something special that would coax a smile from Henry. Cinnamon rolls, flapjacks with berry compote, or her grandmother's famous scrambled eggs with herbs from the small patch she'd started cultivating where Emma's garden used to be. You're spoiling us, Jonah said one morning in early November, watching her flip pancakes with practiced ease. The kitchen was warm and steamy, a fortress against the frost that painted the windows white. Food is comfort, Clara replied, sliding a stack onto his plate. And comfort makes people feel safe enough to heal. Henry bounded into the kitchen, his energy a stark contrast to the silent ghost he'd been just weeks before. Miss Clara, there's ice on the water trough. Jack Frost came in the night. Did he now? Well, we'd better make sure Buttercup has fresh water then, hadn't we? Pa already broke the ice, but he said if it gets much colder, we might need to bring the horses closer to the barn. Jonah nodded, his expression growing serious. Winter comes hard and fast here. Different from Boston, I imagine. Everything here is different from Boston, Clara said, but there was no complaint in her tone. She'd grown to love the raw beauty of Wyoming, the way the mountains changed color with the light, the vast sky that made her feel both insignificant and part of something infinite. After breakfast, lessons began. Henry was an eager student now that the dam of his silence had broken. He devoured books with an appetite that reminded Clara of herself at that age. They'd moved beyond the simple readers to more challenging texts, Swiss Family Robinson, which delighted him with its adventures, and even some of Shakespeare's easier plays, which they read aloud together, taking different parts. But soft. What light through yonder window breaks? Henry recited dramatically, standing on a chair in the schoolroom. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Very good, Clara laughed, though perhaps Romeo wouldn't stand on furniture. He might if he was really trying to see Juliet, Henry countered with the logic of a 10-year-old. Their lessons weren't confined to the schoolroom. Clara believed in practical education, so mathematics became calculating feed for the cattle, geography involved mapping the ranch, and science meant observing the natural world around them. Henry showed her the different tracks in the snow, rabbit, deer, coyote, and explained which plants the cattle could eat and which would make them sick. Ma knew all this stuff, he said one day as they examined ice crystals on a fence post. She grew up on a ranch in Colorado. Pa says that's why she wasn't afraid of the hard life out here. Were you afraid when you first came here? Clara asked carefully. They were still feeling their way around memories of Emma, never knowing which ones would bring smiles and which would bring tears. I was little, maybe 4. I don't remember being afraid. Ma made everything an adventure. His voice grew quieter. She made everything better. She sounds wonderful. She was. Henry kicked at a clump of frozen grass. Sometimes I'm scared I'll forget her voice especially. I try to remember it at night, but it gets fuzzier. Clara knelt beside him, heedless of the snow soaking through her skirt. You know what I do when I'm afraid of forgetting someone's voice? Henry shook his head. I remember the things they said that made me laugh or made me feel loved. The words might fade, but the feeling stays. Your mother's voice might get quieter in your memory, but the love in it, that never goes away. Henry considered this, then slipped his small hand into hers. She used to sing while she made bread. Hymns mostly, but sometimes funny songs she'd make up about the chickens or the cats. What a lovely memory. Would you like to learn some songs? We could sing while we work, like she did. Would Pa mind? Why would he mind? Henry shrugged, but Clara understood. The house had been silent for so long, joy felt like a betrayal. That evening, she broached the subject with Jonah after Henry had gone to bed. They'd fallen into a habit of sharing tea in the kitchen after supper, discussing Henry's progress and planning for his education. Henry's worried you won't like it if he sings, she said directly. He remembers Emma singing and wants to do it too, but he's afraid it will make you sad. Jonah stared into his teacup as if it held answers. Everything makes me sad some days. Her hairbrush still on the dresser, the smell of lavender, the way Henry laughs. He has her laugh. He looked up. But lately the sadness isn't as sharp. It's more like an ache that comes and goes. That's normal. Grief changes shape over time. You sound like you know. I told you about my fiancé. What I didn't say was that for a year after he died, I couldn't look at anything blue without crying. His eyes were blue, you see, the particular shade of a summer sky. She smiled softly. Now I can appreciate blue again. It took time, but the association shifted from loss to gratitude that I'd known him at all. Emma had green eyes, Jonah said suddenly, like spring grass. Henry has them too, though his are darker. Sometimes when he looks at me, he trailed off. It must be hard seeing her and him. Hard and wonderful both. He's all I have left of her. No, Clara said gently. You have your memories, your years together, the ranch you built, the life you shared. Henry is her legacy, but he's not a repository for your grief. He's a little boy who needs his father whole and present. Jonah's jaw tightened. You think I'm not present? I think you're doing your best with an impossible situation, but Henry watches you constantly, taking his cues from you. If you can't speak her name without breaking, neither can he. If you can't find joy in things she loved, he'll feel guilty for every smile. That's harsh. It's honest. You asked me to help your son. This is part of it. They sat in tense silence for a moment, then Jonah's shoulders sagged. You're right. I know you're right. I just don't know how to do better. Start small. Tell him a happy memory about her at dinner. Sing one of her songs. Look through her books with him. Show him it's okay to remember the joy along with the sorrow. The next morning brought the first real snowstorm of the season. Clara woke to a world transformed, everything blanketed in pristine white. Henry was beside himself with excitement. Can we go out? Can we build a snowman? Oh, Miss Clara, wait until you see how beautiful the mountains look. After lessons, Clara said, but she was already planning to make the snow part of their education. They studied water and ice crystals, discussed how animals adapted to winter, and read Jack London's To Build a Fire, though Clara edited some of the darker parts for Henry's age. By afternoon, when the snow had stopped falling, she bundled them both up and out they went. Jonah found them an hour later, having built not just a snowman, but an entire snow family, complete with a snow dog and what might charitably be called a snow horse. Pa, Henry called out, his cheeks red with cold and excitement. Come see. Miss Clara had never made a snow angel before. I had to teach her. Clara was indeed lying in the snow, moving her arms and legs to create wings and a dress, laughing as snow got in her hair. She looked up to find Jonah watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. Don't just stand there, she called out. Henry says you make the best snow angels in Wyoming. That was Ma, actually, Henry said, then caught himself, looking worried. But Jonah just smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. She did. She'd make elaborate ones, said they were watching over the ranch. He looked at the spot where Emma's garden used to be, now covered in snow. She made one right there, last winter. He stopped, swallowed. The last one she made. Henry ran to his father, tugging on his hand. Make one now, Pa, for Ma. Jonah hesitated, then let his son pull him to the spot. With careful deliberation, he lay down in the snow and made a perfect angel, his long limbs creating impressive wings. When he stood, he and Henry both stared at it silently. It's beautiful, Clara said softly. Ma would like it, Henry said. She'd say the snow angels were dancing. That night, something shifted in the house. After dinner, instead of disappearing to his study, Jonah brought out a wooden box Clara hadn't seen before. I thought, maybe we could look through these, he said uncertainly. The box contained photographs, a treasure trove of memories. Emma on their wedding day, young and radiant. Henry as a baby, toothless and grinning. The three of them at what must have been a church picnic, Emma's hair coming loose from its pins as she laughed at something. She was beautiful, Clara murmured, studying a portrait of Emma. She had indeed had green eyes, and a smile that suggested she found life endlessly amusing. She was, Jonah agreed, but more than that, she was kind, funny, stubborn as a mule when she set her mind to something. Like when she insisted on planting roses even though everyone said they wouldn't grow here, Henry added, touching a photo gently. But they did grow. She babied them like they were actual babies. Where are they now? Clara asked. Still there, under the snow. I couldn't bear to tend them, but I couldn't tear them out either. They're probably dead by now. Roses are surprisingly hardy, Clara said. They might surprise you come spring. As winter deepened, Clara became woven into the fabric of ranch life as surely as if she'd always been there. She helped with small chores, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, mending clothes. Mrs. Rodriguez taught her to make tortillas and green chili stew, clucking disapprovingly at her tender Eastern palate, but pleased when Clara persevered despite the spice. You're tougher than you look, miss, the older woman said approvingly. Like a wildflower, delicate-seeming but strong at the root. Clara also met the ranch hands, rough men who nonetheless tipped their hats respectfully and watched their language around her. Old Pete, the one who played fiddle, turned out to be a gentle soul who'd fought in the Mexican War and carried sorrow in his eyes that Clara recognized. Heard you've done wonders with the boy, he said one day when she brought coffee to the barn where the men were working. Henry's done the work himself. Maybe so, but you lit the path. Jonah's different too. Heard him whistling yesterday. Haven't heard that in over a year. Clara had noticed the changes in Jonah too. He smiled more, engaged in their evening conversations with increasing ease, and had even started joining their lessons occasionally, teaching Henry about ranch management and cattle breeds. One evening in early December, a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. Clara worried they'd grow restless, but instead, it became almost magical. They played card games and charades. Jonah told stories of his childhood in Texas, of driving cattle as a young man, of meeting Emma at a dance in Denver. She was visiting her aunt, he recalled. Henry curled against his side on the sofa while Clara sat in the rocking chair, working on some mending, wearing a yellow dress that made her look like sunshine. I couldn't dance worth a damn, stepped on her feet at least a dozen times, but she just laughed and said I'd better keep practicing if I wanted to court her properly. Did you? Keep practicing? Henry asked. Every night for a month. Old Pete taught me. By the time I saw her again, I could waltz without causing injury. Clara smiled at the image of this large, serious man learning to dance in a barn. She must have been impressed. She said I was the most determined man she'd ever met, said that mattered more than fancy footwork. On the third night of the storm, when the wind howled like wolves around the house, Henry had nightmares. Clara heard him crying and found Jonah already there holding his son. Ma! Henry was sobbing. I dreamed Ma was out in the snow and couldn't find her way home. Shh, son, it's just a dream. Clara sat on Henry's other side. Would you like to hear a story my grandmother told me about how the people we love are never really lost? Henry nodded, hiccuping. She said that love is like a golden thread that connects us to everyone we care about. Death can't break it. Distance can't break it. Time can't break it. Your mother's thread is still connected to you, running from your heart to wherever she is now. When you miss her, you can tug on that thread, and she'll know you're thinking of her. But I can't see any thread, Henry whispered. Not with your eyes, but you can feel it. That warm feeling when you remember her laugh. That's the thread. The way you know she'd be proud when you read a difficult passage, that's the thread too. Henry considered this, then reached for his father's hand. Do you feel it too, Pa? Every day, son. Every day. When the storm finally passed, They emerged to a world transformed. Drifts reached the first-floor windows in places, and the barn was half buried. All the ranch hands pitched in to dig out, and Clara insisted on helping despite Jonah's protests. "I'm not made of sponge sugar," she said, wielding a shovel with determination, if not skill. "Besides, many hands make light work." She lasted an hour before her arms gave out, but the men seemed to appreciate the effort. "You've got grit, miss," one said approvingly. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's work, Clara found Jonah standing by the window in the parlor, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains pink and gold. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. "Just thinking how different this winter is from last year. Last year, I could barely make myself get out of bed some mornings. The house felt like a tomb. Henry wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat half the time. I thought we'd both fade away like ghosts." "But you didn't?" "No, we didn't." He turned to look at her. "Because of you." "You give me too much credit." "I don't give you enough." He stepped closer. "Clara, I need to tell you something. These past months, you've brought something back to this house I thought was gone forever. Not just Henry's voice, but life, hope, the possibility that happiness isn't just a memory." Clara's heart began to race. "Jonah, I'm not saying that. I know it's too soon. I know you came here to teach, not to, but I needed you to know that you've saved us, both of us." Before Clara could respond, Henry burst into the room. "Miss Clara, Pa, come quick. The cat had kittens in the barn." The moment broken, they followed Henry out into the cold, but Clara was acutely aware of Jonah beside her, of what had almost been said. The kittens were tiny mewling things, 5 of them nestled against their mother in the hay. "Can we keep them all?" Henry pleaded. "We'll see," Jonah said. "They need to stay with their mother for several weeks first." "Ma always wanted barn cats," Henry said. "She said they kept the mice away from the grain." "Then we'll keep them," Jonah decided. She was usually right about such things. As they walked back to the house, Henry between them chattering about names for the kittens, Clara caught Jonah's eye. He smiled, a promise that their conversation wasn't finished, just postponed. Christmas approached with a flurry of activity. Clara threw herself into preparations, determined to make it special for Henry and for Jonah, though she tried not to examine that impulse too closely. She taught Henry to make paper decorations, and they strung cranberries and popcorn for garland. The ranch hands cut down a small pine tree, and they decorated it with candles and the ornaments Clara found carefully packed away in the attic. "Ma's decorations," Henry breathed, handling them reverently. "Should we use them?" Clara asked Jonah quietly. Yes, she'd hate to think of them gathering dust. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Rodriguez and several families from neighboring ranches came for dinner. The house filled with laughter and music. Old Pete brought his fiddle, and someone else had a guitar. Clara had prepared a feast with Mrs. Rodriguez's help, and the table groaned under the weight of roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables, pies, and cookies Henry had helped bake. "You've outdone yourself, Miss Whitfield," said Mrs. Patterson from the Double Bar Ranch. "I haven't seen the Mercer place this festive since—" She trailed off awkwardly. "Since Emma was alive," Jonah finished calmly. "And she would have loved this. She always said Christmas was for celebrating, not mourning." After dinner, the children performed a nativity play Clara had helped them rehearse. Henry played Joseph with serious dedication, only forgetting his lines once. When the evening wound down and guests began departing, many pulled Clara aside to thank her. "You've worked a miracle here," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "That boy was like a ghost last time I saw him. And Jonah, well, we worried he might do something desperate." After everyone left and Henry was in bed, Clara and Jonah sat by the dying fire, the Christmas tree candles casting flickering shadows. "Thank you," Jonah said simply, "for all of this, for bringing Christmas back to this house. It was Henry's doing too. He worked so hard on everything. He wants to give you something special tomorrow. He's been working on it in secret for weeks. Oh, he doesn't need to. He wants to. You've given him so much, Clara. You've given us both so much." The next morning, Henry was awake before dawn, practically vibrating with excitement. After they'd opened the practical gifts, new books for Henry, warm gloves for everyone, a pocket knife for Jonah, Henry produced a carefully wrapped package for Clara. I made it myself, he said shyly. Pa helped a little with the hard parts. Inside was a wooden frame, clearly handmade with loving care despite its rough edges. But it was what was in the frame that made Clara's breath catch. A watercolor painting of the ranch house with 3 figures standing in front of it. The execution was childish, but the intent was clear. Jonah, Henry, and Clara, together. It's us, Henry explained unnecessarily. Our family. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It's beautiful, Henry. The most beautiful gift I've ever received. Really? Really? Henry threw his arms around her, and over his head, Clara met Jonah's eyes. There was a question there, one that would need answering soon. That night, after Henry was asleep, clutching a new wooden horse Jonah had carved for him, Clara stood on the porch, watching the stars. The cold was bitter, but the sky was crystal clear, diamonds scattered on black velvet. Jonah joined her, bringing a blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders. You'll catch your death, he said. It's so beautiful. I never saw stars like this in Boston. One of the compensations for the hard life out here. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Jonah spoke again. Henry called you family. I know. He's not wrong. You've become part of us, Clara. Part of our daily rhythm, our hopes, our healing. He turned to face her. Your contract is for a year, but we're hoping that you'll consider staying longer. As Henry's teacher? As whatever you want to be. Teacher, yes, but also, he struggled for words. I'm not good at this. Emma always said I was better with actions than words. What I'm trying to say is, you've brought light back into our lives. And somewhere along the way, I've come to care for you. Not as a replacement for Emma, no one could be that, but as yourself, Clara. Your patience, your strength, your way of seeing beauty even in broken things. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. Jonah, I'm not asking for an answer now. I know it's complicated. You came here for a job, not for this. And maybe you have plans to return to Boston or to move on to another position. But I needed you to know how I feel, how we feel. Henry loves you, Clara, and I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the frosty air between them, fragile as ice crystals. I don't know what to say, Clara whispered. You don't have to say anything. Just think about it. Think about staying, not just for the winter, but for all the seasons to come. He went inside, leaving Clara alone with the stars and her tumultuous thoughts. She'd come west to teach, to escape her grief, to find purpose. She hadn't expected to find a home. She hadn't expected to fall in love with a broken family and the vast, wild land they inhabited. But standing there, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of wood smoke and safety, looking at a house where candlelight glowed warm in the windows, Clara realized that somewhere between autumn and Christmas, she'd stopped being a visitor and started being home. The new year arrived with a fresh snowfall and new challenges. Henry, secure now in his recovery, began pushing boundaries as children do. He tested Clara's patience with deliberate mischief, hiding her teaching supplies, putting salt in the sugar bowl, once even trying to convince her that Jonah had said lessons were canceled for the week. Henry James Mercer, Clara said sternly, using his full name for effect. If you think you can bamboozle someone who taught the Fitzgerald twins in Boston, you are sadly mistaken. Those boys once convinced a substitute teacher that their regular lessons included 2 hours of playing marbles. Did it work? Henry asked, intrigued despite himself. For exactly 1 day. Then I returned and they had to write, I will not deceive my teachers 100 times each. Henry's eyes widened. You wouldn't make me do that. Try me, Clara said with a sweet smile that promised consequences. But these small rebellions were actually a good sign. Henry felt safe enough to be naughty, to be a normal boy instead of a grieving ghost. Jonah, when informed of his son's antics, actually smiled. He's testing you, seeing if you'll stay even when he's difficult. Of course I'll stay, Clara said without thinking, then blushed at the implications. I'm glad, Jonah said simply. The January thaw came unexpectedly, turning the ranch into a muddy mess that clung to boots and wagon wheels with stubborn determination. Clara discovered that Wyoming mud was an entirely different creature from Boston mud. It seemed alive, reaching up to grab at her skirts and pull her down. She'd already fallen twice trying to reach the chicken coop, much to Henry's poorly hidden amusement. "It's not funny," she said, trying to maintain dignity while covered in mud from knee to hem. "You're right," Henry said, his lips twitching. "It's very serious. Pa says the mud season is the hardest part of ranching. Harder than blizzards?" "Blizzards don't steal your boots right off your feet," Henry said sagely, then burst into giggles as Clara's left boot made a sucking sound and came half off. She was saved from further embarrassment by Jonah's arrival, leading 2 horses. "Thought you might like to learn to ride," he said to Clara. "Be easier than walking until the ground freezes again." Clara eyed the horses warily. "I've never been on a horse in my life." "City girl, see," Henry said with the superiority of someone who'd been riding since he was 5. "Henry, mind your manners," Jonah warned, but his eyes were warm with humor. "Everyone starts somewhere. Your mother was terrified of horses when we first met." "Ma was?" Henry seemed stunned by this revelation. "Scared to death. Took me 3 months to coax her onto the gentlest mare in Colorado. But once she learned, couldn't keep her out of the saddle." The horse Jonah had chosen for Clara was a placid bay mare named Rosie, who seemed more interested in the sparse grass poking through the mud than in her prospective rider. Still, Clara approached with caution. "She won't hurt you," Jonah said, his voice gentle. He stood close behind her, guiding her hand to the horse's neck. "See? She likes you already." Clara was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him against the winter air. Since Christmas, since his declaration, there had been moments like this, charged with possibility, with things unsaid. She'd given him no answer yet, and he hadn't pressed, but the question hung between them like morning mist. Learning to ride became part of their daily routine. Every afternoon, weather permitting, Jonah taught her while Henry offered commentary that ranged from helpful to hilarious. By early February, Clara could mount without assistance and ride at a walk without clutching the saddle horn in terror. "You're a natural," Jonah said one afternoon as they rode along the property line, Henry racing ahead on Buttercup. "Liar," Clara laughed, "but a kind one." "I don't lie," he said seriously. "Not about important things." They rode in silence for a while, watching Henry practice the trick riding old Pete had been teaching him. Nothing dangerous, just standing in the stirrups and leaning low over Buttercup's neck. "He's so different," Claire observed, "from that silent child I met in October." "You gave him back his voice." "No, he never lost it. He just needed to know it was safe to use it again. And you made it safe." "We all did. You, me, even Mrs. Rodriguez with her gruff kindness. It takes a village to heal a child. But it takes someone special to know how to start the healing." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You give me too much credit." "I don't think I give you enough." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you, something that might change how you feel about things." Her stomach clenched. "What is it?" "The ranch is in trouble, financial trouble. The winter's been harder than expected. We lost more cattle than I'd planned for, and beef prices are down. I might have to sell some land to keep us afloat." Clara absorbed this, understanding suddenly why she'd seen him up late so often, poring over ledgers by lamplight. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. I can probably hold on until spring, see if prices improve, but—" He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I couldn't court you, couldn't ask you to consider a future here without being honest about what that future might hold." "You think I care about money?" Clara asked quietly. "I think you deserve security, stability, things I might not be able to offer. I had security in Boston. I had stability. What I didn't have was purpose, or joy, or the feeling that I was exactly where I needed to be." She turned Rosie to face him directly. "Jonah Mercer, if you think I'm the kind of woman who would abandon ship at the first sign of rough waters, then you don't know me at all." His eyes widened. "Does that mean—" "Henry's coming back," she said quickly, not ready for that conversation yet. Indeed, Henry was galloping toward them, his face bright with excitement. "Pa, Miss Clara, rider's coming. Looks like Mr. Carson from the bank." Jonah's face went grim. "He's early, not supposed to be here until next week." They rode back to the house quickly, arriving just as a small party of men dismounted. Clara recognized Mr. Carson from town, a thin, nervous man who always looked slightly apologetic. With him were two men she didn't know, dressed in city clothes that looked absurdly out of place against the muddy ranch yard. Jonah, Carson said, wringing his hands. I'm sorry to come unexpected, but these gentlemen insisted. This is Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Sterling from the Eastern Cattle Company. Blackwood, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, looked around the ranch dismissively. So this is the property. Smaller than I expected. The property's not for sale, Jonah said flatly. Everything's for sale at the right price, Sterling, younger and somehow oilier than his companion, said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We're prepared to make a generous offer. I said it's not for sale. You owe the bank $300, Blackwood said bluntly, due in 60 days. We're offering $500 for the whole spread. That's enough to clear your debt and start fresh somewhere else. This is our home, Henry said, his voice small but fierce. Sterling laughed. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, boy. Clara saw Jonah's fists clench and stepped forward. Gentlemen, perhaps we could discuss this inside. It's rather cold, and I'm sure you've had a long journey. The men seemed to notice her for the first time. And you are? Blackwood asked dismissively. Clara Whitfield, Henry's teacher. She used her best Boston society voice, the one that could freeze or thaw at will. Currently, it was pure ice. Shall we? Inside, she served coffee with steady hands while the men laid out their proposition. They wanted the ranch for its water rights, apparently. The stream that ran through the property was valuable for their plans to expand their cattle empire. $300 in 60 days or the bank forecloses, Carson said miserably. I'm sorry, Jonah. I tried to get an extension, but the board wouldn't approve it. Because someone told them not to, Jonah said, looking at Blackwood. This is about forcing me to sell. It's about business, Blackwood said coldly. Nothing personal. It's extremely personal when you're trying to take our home, Clara said sharply. Mr. Mercer has worked this land for 7 years. His wife is buried here. You're not talking about property. You're talking about people's lives. As I said, sentiment doesn't pay bills, Sterling repeated. No, but cattle do, Clara said. How many head do you have, Jonah? 42 that survived the winter. At current prices, that's... She did quick mental math. Roughly $250 if sold at market. Leaving him $50 short, Blackwood pointed out. And that's if he can get them to market, if prices hold, if nothing goes wrong. Then we'll have to make sure nothing goes wrong, Clara said firmly. We? Sterling smirked. What's a school teacher from Boston going to do? Teach the cattle arithmetic? Clara stood, drawing herself up to her full height, which wasn't impressive, but her presence made up for it. Gentlemen, I think you've said what you came to say. Mr. Mercer has 60 days to make payment. Until then, this remains his property, and I'll thank you to leave. Blackwood stood as well, his bulk intimidating. You've got spine, Miss Whitfield, but spine doesn't change facts. 60 days. He turned to Jonah. The offer stands until then. After that, we'll take the property at foreclosure prices, considerably less than $500. After they left, Jonah slumped in his chair. $300. Might as well be $3,000. We'll find it, Claire said firmly. You heard them. Even selling all the cattle won't be enough. Then we'll find another way. What about horses, crops? Is there anything else of value? Emma's jewelry, Jonah said quietly. But I was saving that for Henry, something of his mother's to give his own wife someday. Ma wouldn't want us to lose the ranch, Henry said. He'd been quiet during the confrontation, but now his face was set with determination. She'd say the land is more important than jewelry. We're not selling your mother's things, Clara said firmly. There has to be another way. That night, she lay awake thinking. $300. In Boston, she had savings, nearly $200 put aside from years of careful economy. But it would take weeks to get it transferred, and even then, it wouldn't be enough. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. It was Henry in his nightshirt, looking younger than his 10 years. Miss Clara, I can't sleep. Neither can I. Come, sit. She patted the bed beside her. Are we going to lose the ranch? Not if I can help it. But what can we do? We don't have $300. Clara pulled him close. Do you know what I've learned, Henry? The most important problems often have unexpected solutions. We just have to be clever enough to find them. Like the crow with the pitcher? Exactly like that. We'll drop pebbles in until the water rises. But what pebbles do we have? Clara thought about that. What did they have? Cattle, not enough. Horses, a few. Their labor, their determination. And then, suddenly, she had an idea. Henry, does your father have a good relationship with the other ranchers around here? Sure. They help each other out all the time. Why? Because maybe that's our answer. Not solving this alone, but together. The next morning, Clara presented her idea to Jonah. What if we organized a joint cattle drive? Pool resources with the other small ranchers, share the costs of getting to market? You'd get better prices in Denver than selling locally, and splitting the expenses would make it feasible. Jonah stared at her. That's actually not a bad idea, but it's risky. Weather's unpredictable this time of year, and we'd need drovers, supplies. Then we'd better start planning. Over the next week, Jonah visited every small ranch within riding distance. Many were facing similar pressures from the Eastern Cattle Company, and the idea of banding together appealed to them. By week's end, they had 5 ranchers committed to a joint drive. Nearly 200 head of cattle total. It could work, Jonah said, exhaustion and hope warring in his voice. If we leave in 2 weeks, we can reach Denver before the worst of the spring storms. Then we have 2 weeks to prepare, Claire said practically. What do you need? What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Clara took over the ranch's daily operations while Jonah coordinated with the other ranchers. She learned to milk cows, gather eggs, and even helped with calving when one of the cows went into early labor. Never thought I'd see a proper Boston lady up to her elbows in afterbirth, Mrs. Rodriguez commented, but her tone was approving. Nothing proper about me anymore, Clara said, washing blood from her hands. The calf had survived, and that's what mattered. Henry threw himself into helping, taking on more chores without complaint. He seemed to understand that this was about more than money. It was about keeping their home, their life, the place where his mother's memory lived. The night before the cattle drive was to begin, Clara found Jonah in the barn, checking equipment one last time. You should be sleeping, she said. You'll need your strength. Can't sleep. Keep thinking of everything that could go wrong. Then think of everything that could go right instead. She moved closer. Jonah, I need to tell you something. He looked up from the saddle he was mending. I have savings in Boston, about $200. I've already written to have it transferred. It's yours for the ranch. Clara, no, I can't take your money. It's not taking if it's freely given. She took a breath. And it's an investment in our future. Our future? You asked me to stay, to consider making a life here. Well, I've considered, and my answer is yes. The saddle fell from Jonah's hands. Clara, I love Henry like he was my own. And you, Jonah, somewhere between teaching your son to speak again and learning to ride in Wyoming mud, I fell in love with you too. Not as a replacement for anyone, but as the man who's strong enough to show vulnerability, who loves his son fiercely, who's fighting to keep his wife's dream alive even when it costs him everything. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. You magnificent, impossible woman. How did I get so lucky twice in one lifetime? It's not luck, Clara said against his chest. It's grace, the kind that comes from being brave enough to love again after loss. He tilted her chin up, and their lips met, a kiss that tasted of promise and determination and the peculiar sweetness that comes from joy found after sorrow. When I get back from Denver, he said when they finally pulled apart, we'll do this properly. Courthouse, minister, the whole thing. I don't need proper. I just need you to come back safe. I'll come back. I have too much to come back to now. The morning of departure dawned cold but clear. 5 ranches worth of cattle milled in the valley, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The drovers, ranch hands from all the participating spreads plus a few hired men, were mounting up, checking supplies, preparing for the 2-week journey to Denver. Clara stood with Henry and the other families who were staying behind. She'd packed food for the journey, mended every piece of clothing Jonah would take, and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. "You take care of Miss Clara," Jonah told Henry solemnly. "You're the man of the house while I'm gone." "Yes, Pa." Henry stood straighter. "We'll be fine. We'll take care of everything." Jonah turned to Clara, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her in front of everyone. Instead, he took her hand, squeezed it tightly. "2 weeks," he said. "3 at most. We'll be here." And then they were gone. The cattle drive moving slowly east, dust rising in their wake. Clara stood watching until they disappeared over the rise, her arm around Henry's shoulders. "He'll be okay, won't he?" Henry asked. "Of course he will. Your father is the strongest man I know." But as they walked back to the suddenly empty house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. The first week passed slowly. Clara and Henry maintained their routine, lessons in the morning, chores in the afternoon, quiet evenings by the fire. But the house felt hollow without Jonah's presence, like a song missing its bass note. "I keep listening for him," Henry confessed one evening. "Keep thinking I hear his boots on the porch." "I do too," Clara admitted. They were playing checkers, but neither of them was really concentrating. "Do you really love him?" Henry asked suddenly. "Pa, I mean." Clara considered her answer carefully. "Yes, I do. Does that bother you?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." He moved a checker aimlessly. "It feels like betraying Ma, being happy she's gone." "Oh, Henry." Clara abandoned the game to kneel beside his chair. "We're not happy she's gone. We'll never be happy about that. But we can be happy about new things while still missing her. Your mother wouldn't want you and your father to stop living, stop loving." "How do you know?" "Because any mother who loved her family as much as yours did would want them to find joy again. She'd want your father to have someone to share his burdens with. She'd want you to have someone to teach you and care for you." "She'd like you," Henry said quietly. "You both love books. And you're patient like she was." "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." Henry leaned against her. "I'm glad you're staying. Even if Pa hadn't asked you, I was going to." "Were you now?" "I had a whole speech planned. Want to hear it?" "Very much." As Henry stood clearing his throat dramatically. "Miss Clara, you came here to teach me, but you've taught us both, me and Pa, how to be a family again. So I formally request that you stay forever and be my mother. Not my first mother, because that was Ma, but my second mother, which is also important." He paused. "I was going to say more, but I forgot." Clara was crying, she realized, tears streaming down her face. "That was perfect, Henry. Absolutely perfect." "So you'll really stay? Forever?" "Forever." That night the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending drafts through every crack in the house. Clara couldn't sleep, worried about Jonah and the others exposed to the elements. She finally gave up, wrapping herself in a shawl and going down to the kitchen to make tea. She found Mrs. Rodriguez already there, rosary in her hands. "Can't sleep either?" the older woman asked. "The wind sounds angry." "Spring storm's coming. They'll have to move fast to beat them to Denver." Mrs. Rodriguez poured her tea from the pot already steeping. "You love him." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Yes." "Good. He needs love. That man's been walking around half dead since Emma passed. You brought him back to life." "He was already fighting his way back. He just needed someone to light the path." "Maybe. Or maybe you were both finding your way to each other." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her shrewdly. "You'll be good for this place. The ranch needs a woman's touch again." "If we can save it." "You will. I have faith. God doesn't bring people together just to tear them apart." Clara wished she had the older woman's certainty. The wind howled louder, and somewhere in the distance she heard the crack of breaking wood. Morning revealed damage, a section of fence down, one of the chicken coops partially collapsed. Clara and Henry worked alongside the remaining ranch hands to repair what they could, but it was clear a bigger storm was coming. "We need to move the animals closer to the barn," old Pete said, scanning the darkening sky. "This feels like a bad one brewing." They spent the day preparing, securing loose boards, bringing the horses into the barn, moving what supplies they could under cover. By evening, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees and the first snowflakes were falling. Snow? In March? Clara asked incredulously. Welcome to Wyoming, old Pete said grimly. Seen snow in June before. Spring storms are the worst. They come out of nowhere and hit hard. By nightfall, it was a full blizzard. Clara, Henry, and the two ranch hands who'd stayed behind huddled in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house. The wind shrieked like a living thing, and snow pelted the windows with vicious force. Pa's out in this, Henry whispered, pressed against Clara's side. He'll find shelter, she assured him, though her own heart was racing with fear. The drovers know this country. They'll know where to take cover. But privately, she wondered, 200 cattle in a blizzard, limited supplies, exhausted men. How could they possibly survive? The storm raged for 2 days. They lost 3 chickens to the cold, and one of the barn doors blew off completely. Clara and the men took turns checking on the animals, fighting through wind that could knock a person down, snow that blinded and disoriented. On the third morning, Clara woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snowdrifts reached the roof in some places, and the landscape was unrecognizable. We need to dig out, old Pete said wearily. Check for damage, see what we lost. They worked all day, excavating paths, checking on animals, assessing damage. It could have been worse, Clara told herself. They hadn't lost any large animals, the house was intact, they had supplies. But Jonah was still out there somewhere, and the storm would have hit the cattle drive hard. When should he be back? Henry asked that evening, exhaustion evident in his young face. Soon, Clara said, though by her calculation they were already overdue. The storm would have slowed them down. Another day passed. Then another. Clara maintained a cheerful front for Henry, but inside dread was building. What if something had happened? What if Jonah was hurt, or worse? How would she tell Henry? How would they survive? On the 6th day after the storm, as Clara was teaching Henry geography, more to distract them both than from any educational necessity, they heard it. Horses. Multiple horses, approaching fast. They ran to the porch, Henry barely remembering to grab a coat. Through the bright morning sun, they could see riders approaching. Clara counted 1, 2, 3. Where were the others? Where was Jonah? Then she saw him, riding slightly behind, moving slowly. Relief flooded through her so intensely her knees nearly buckled. Pa! Henry shouted, running toward the riders despite the deep snow. Jonah dismounted stiffly, catching his son in a fierce embrace. Over Henry's head, his eyes found Clara's. He looked exhausted, worn down to nothing, but he was alive. He was home. The cattle? Clara asked as she approached. Lost about 30 head in the storm, he said wearily, but we saved most of them. Got them to Denver just as the buyers were about to leave. Prices were good, better than expected. And? He reached into his coat, pulling out a leather pouch. $320, enough for the bank and a little extra to see us through. Clara threw herself into his arms, not caring who saw. You did it. You saved the ranch. We did it, he corrected, holding her tight. Couldn't have managed without your idea, your planning. It was terrifying, Henry said, still clinging to his father. The storm was so bad we thought we were afraid. I know, son. We found shelter in a box canyon, waited it out. Lost some cattle to the cold, but the men are all safe. He looked at Clara again. I had plenty of time to think during that storm. About what mattered, what I'd regret if I didn't make it back. Jonah? Marry me, he said suddenly. Not in a few weeks or months. Now. Today. I don't want to waste another moment. Clara's heart stopped. Today? We almost lost everything. The ranch, each other, our chance at happiness. I'm tired of almost, Clara. I want certainty. I want to know you're mine and I'm yours, official and proper and permanent. Yes, Henry said before Clara could answer. Say yes, Miss Clara. Clara looked at this man, weathered, exhausted, covered in trail dust, but looking at her like she was everything good in the world. Then at Henry, bouncing on his toes with excitement. Yes, she said. Yes, of course yes. The wedding, such as it was, took place that evening. Word spread quickly through the valley. Perhaps Mrs. Rodriguez had something to do with that. And by sunset, the house was full of neighbors. Reverend Mills from town performed the ceremony in the parlor, with Henry as best man and Mrs. Rodriguez as witness. Clara wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Jonah had cleaned up, shaved, put on his Sunday suit, but it was the expression on his face as she walked toward him that Clara knew she'd remember forever. Joy and wonder, and a love so deep it took her breath away. "Do you, Clara Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Mills asked. "I do," Clara said, her voice strong and clear. "Do you, Jonah Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was rough with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jonah kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, to cheers from the assembled crowd. Henry hugged them both, and Clara realized she was crying, happy tears that felt like spring rain after a long drought. The celebration went on late into the night. Old Pete played his fiddle, couples danced, and someone had brought a cake, lopsided but made with love. Clara danced with Jonah, with Henry, even with Old Pete, who surprised her with his grace. "Never thought I'd see Jonah happy again," Pete told her as they waltzed. "You're a miracle, Mrs. Mercer." Mrs. Mercer. The name felt foreign but right, like a coat that would fit perfectly once she got used to wearing it. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, pressing Clara's hands and welcoming her properly to the community, Henry tugged on her sleeve. "Should I call you Ma now?" he asked uncertainly. Clara knelt to his level. "You can call me whatever feels right. Clara, Miss Clara, Ma, I'll answer to any of them." "I think I'd like to call you Ma, not because I'm forgetting my first Ma, but because you're my Ma now too. Is that okay?" "It's more than okay. It's perfect." Later, after Henry was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara stood with her new husband on the porch, looking out at the moon-bright snow. "No regrets?" Jonah asked, his arm around her waist. "None. You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." He pulled her closer. "Emma would have liked you. You would have been friends." "You think so?" "I know so. You both have that same strength, that way of seeing the best in people and situations." He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought I'd love again, you know. After Emma died, I thought that part of me died too. But you brought it back to life." "You brought yourself back to life," Clara corrected. "I just reminded you it was possible." The morning after the wedding dawned bright and cold, frost painting delicate patterns on the windows that caught the early light like scattered diamonds. Clara woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth beside her, then remembered. She was married. She was Mrs. Mercer now, lying in the bed that had once been Emma's, in a room that still held traces of another woman's presence. Jonah was already awake, watching her with an expression of wonder that made her heart flutter. "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer," he said softly, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she replied, suddenly shy despite everything they'd shared. "Having second thoughts?" "Never. Though I'm wondering what happens now. We went about this all backwards. Marriage before courtship, crisis before calm. We make our own way," he said, pulling her closer. "That's what we've been doing all along, isn't it?" A knock at the door interrupted them. "Pa? Ma?" Henry's voice was tentative, testing out the new word. "Mrs. Rodriguez is here, and she says if you don't come down for breakfast, she's going to come up and get you herself." Clara laughed, the tension breaking. "We'd better not test that threat." Life as a married woman on a Wyoming ranch was different from anything Clara had imagined during her quiet years in Boston. She found herself not just teaching Henry, but truly partnering with Jonah in running the ranch. The near loss had taught them both that they were stronger together, and Jonah included her in decisions about livestock, finances, and plans for the future. "You have a head for numbers," he said one evening as they went over the ledgers together. "Better than mine." "Years of managing my own finances on a teacher's salary," Clara replied, making notes about expenses. "You learn to squeeze every penny until it squeals." The $320 from the cattle drive had paid off the bank, leaving them with just enough to see them through until the next harvest. But Clara could see they needed more than survival. They needed to thrive. "What if we diversified?" she suggested. Not just cattle, but sheep, too. I've been reading that wool prices are steady, and sheep can graze on rougher land than cattle. Jonah looked skeptical. Sheep and cattle don't mix well, and the other ranchers, sheep aren't popular around here. Because everyone's always done things the same way. But times are changing, Jonah. We need to change with them or get left behind. It was an ongoing discussion, one of many, as they learned to navigate not just marriage but partnership. There were adjustments, of course. Clara had to learn Jonah's rhythms and moods, the way he went quiet when worried, how he showed affection through actions rather than words. He had to adjust to her need for conversation, her Boston ways that occasionally clashed with ranch pragmatism. And both of them had to navigate the ghost of Emma that still lingered in unexpected moments. It happened first with the garden. As spring truly took hold, Clara decided to restore the plot where Emma's garden had been. She didn't think anything of it until she found Jonah standing at the window, watching her turn the soil with an expression of raw pain. "I'm sorry," she said, coming inside. "I should have asked. If it's too painful—" "No," he said roughly. "It's right. The land shouldn't stay dead because—" He trailed off, then pulled her against him. "Sometimes I forget she's gone. I see you working there, and for a moment I think, then I remember. We can leave it fallow, if you prefer." "Plant it," he said firmly. "Plant something beautiful. She would hate that it's been bare so long." As Clara planted vegetables for practicality but added flowers for beauty, cosmos and zinnias, marigolds and sweet peas. Henry helped, chattering about what his mother had grown, which spots got the best sun, where she'd planted the roses that had miraculously survived the neglect. Those roses bloomed in May, a profusion of pink and red that seemed impossible given how long they'd been abandoned. Clara cut some for the table, and Jonah stopped short when he saw them. "Emma's roses," he said quietly. "I hope it's all right. They were so beautiful, I couldn't resist." He touched one gentle petal. "She babied these things. Brought them from her mother's garden in Colorado. Traveled with them in the wagon wrapped in wet burlap. I thought for sure they'd die when—" He cleared his throat. "Thank you for saving them. They saved themselves. They just needed someone to clear the weeds away." It was Henry who suggested they visit Emma's grave on her birthday in late May. They'd never been all together. Jonah went alone sometimes, Clara knew, and Henry had admitted he'd snuck out to visit a few times. But this was different, a family pilgrimage. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking the valley, a peaceful spot with a view of the mountains Emma had loved. Her stone was simple. Emma Catherine Mercer, beloved wife and mother, 1850 to 1875. 25, Clara murmured. So young. She always said she planned to live to 90, Jonah said. Said she had too much to do to die young. Henry placed wildflowers on the grave, arranged with the same care he'd once used when bringing bouquets to his living mother. "Hi, Ma," he said quietly. "I brought you flowers, and I brought Clara. My new Ma. I think you'd like her. She makes Pa smile again, and she taught me about poetry like you used to." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This brave boy, making introductions between his two mothers. "She teaches me other stuff too," Henry continued. "And she makes really good pancakes, not better than yours, just different. And she saved Pa's roses. They're blooming real pretty." Jonah knelt beside his son, placing his own handful of flowers. "Emma, love," he said, his voice rough. "I want you to know we're all right. Better than all right. Clara's helped us heal, helped us become a family again. I think you would have chosen her yourself if you could have." They stayed for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As they walked back down the hill, Henry slipped one hand into Clara's, the other into his father's, linking them together. "Is it weird that I'm happy and sad at the same time?" he asked. "No, sweetheart," Clara said. "That's what love does. It makes room for all the feelings at once." Summer brought its own challenges and revelations. The Eastern Cattle Company hadn't given up on acquiring the ranch, though their tactics changed from direct pressure to subtle sabotage. Fences were cut, letting cattle stray. Water was diverted upstream, reducing the flow to the ranch. One morning they woke to find their prize bull dead, apparently from eating poisoned feed. "Blackwood," Jonah said grimly, examining the animal. Can't prove it, but I know it was him. What do we do? Clara asked. We survive. We outlast him. And we don't give him the satisfaction of breaking us. The other ranchers were experiencing similar troubles. At the 4th of July celebration in town, the talk was all about the Eastern Cattle Company's tactics. They're trying to starve us out, Tom Patterson said. If they can't buy us, they'll destroy us. Then we stand together, Clara said firmly. All the men turned to look at her. Women didn't usually speak up at these gatherings. They're counting on picking us off one by one. But together, we're stronger. What are you suggesting, Mrs. Mercer? Asked Bill Crawford from the Double Diamond. A cooperative. We share resources, support each other through troubles, market our cattle together for better prices, make it harder for them to target any one ranch. There was skeptical murmuring, but Jonah stood beside his wife. Clara's right. We're already stronger for working together on the cattle drive. Why not make it formal? It took weeks of discussion and negotiation, but by August, the Bitter Creek Ranchers Cooperative was formed. They pooled resources for supplies, getting better prices through bulk purchases. They shared labor during busy times, helping each other with branding and harvesting, and they presented a united front against the Eastern Cattle Company's harassment. Blackwood was furious when he learned of it. He showed up at the ranch one hot August afternoon, his face red with anger and heat. "You think you're clever," he spat at Clara, who'd answered the door. "Getting these fools to band together." "I think we're neighbors helping neighbors," Clara replied calmly. "Nothing illegal about that." "You're interfering with legitimate business." "Your legitimate business includes poisoning livestock and cutting fences?" His face darkened. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not. But the territorial marshal might be interested in investigating. I've been documenting everything, Mr. Blackwood. Every cut fence, every dead animal, every diverted stream. Amazing what patterns emerge when you keep good records. You threatening me, woman? I'm informing you that your actions have consequences, and I'm not afraid of you." Jonah appeared behind her, rifle in hand. "I think you'd better leave, Blackwood, and don't come back on our land." After Blackwood left, Jonah pulled Clara close. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman in Wyoming." "Can I be both?" she asked, though her hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over. "You could have gotten hurt. So could you, every day you stand against him. We're in this together, remember?" The summer was also when Clara suspected she might be pregnant. The nausea came first, waves of it in the morning that had her racing for the wash basin. Then the exhaustion, bone deep and overwhelming. She tried to hide it at first, uncertain and not wanting to raise hopes if she was wrong. But Mrs. Rodriguez noticed, of course. "You're with child," the older woman said bluntly one morning when Clara couldn't keep down breakfast. "I don't know for certain." "I've seen enough pregnant women to know." "How far along?" Clara calculated. 2 months, maybe, since April. "Have you told Jonah?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her shrewdly. "You're worried about replacing Emma again." It was too perceptive, too accurate. "She gave him a son. What if he doesn't want— That man wants a family with you. Anyone can see it, and Henry could use siblings." The opportunity to tell Jonah came unexpectedly. They were watching the sunset from the porch, Henry playing with the barn cats in the yard, when Clara felt the nausea rise again. She barely made it to the rail before being sick. "Clara!" Jonah was beside her instantly, supporting her. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "Not ill," she managed. "Pregnant." He went absolutely still. "Pregnant?" "I think so. I'm fairly certain." "Clara." His voice was full of wonder. "A baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He spun her around, lifting her off her feet. "I'm ecstatic. When? How long?" "November, I think. Maybe December." Henry had run over, alarmed by the commotion. "What's wrong? Is Ma sick?" "Not sick," Jonah said, setting Clara down gently. "Henry, how would you feel about being a big brother?" Henry's eyes widened. "Really? A baby?" "Really," Clara confirmed, still feeling uncertain about his reaction. Henry whooped, jumping up and down. "A brother or a sister, I don't care which. This is the best news ever." That night, As Clara lay in bed fighting waves of nausea, Jonah brought her tea and crackers. Emma was sick like this with Henry, he said carefully. Ginger tea helped. You can talk about her, Clara said. About her pregnancy, the birth. I want to know. She was sick for 3 months, then felt wonderful. She said carrying Henry was the easiest thing she'd ever done, right up until the birth. That was, he paused. That was hard. 2 days of labor. The midwife thought we might lose them both. Clara reached for his hand. But they survived. They did. And you will too. I'll get the best midwife, or a doctor from Denver if needed. Jonah, women have babies on ranches all the time. Not my woman, not my baby. The protectiveness was sweet, if sometimes overwhelming. As summer turned to fall and Clara's condition became obvious, Jonah tried to stop her from doing anything more strenuous than teaching Henry. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she protested when he tried to stop her from collecting eggs. The doctor said you need to be careful. The doctor said I'm healthy as a horse, his exact words. The doctor had visited in September, confirming the pregnancy and declaring everything normal. The baby was due in early December, which meant Clara would be heavily pregnant through the harvest season. The cooperative proved its worth during harvest. When Clara could no longer manage heavy work, neighboring women came to help. When Jonah needed to be in the fields, neighboring men took turns checking on Clara. It was community in action, the very thing that Blackwood and his ilk couldn't understand or defeat. Henry appointed himself Clara's protector, following her everywhere, carrying things for her, reading to her when she rested. He also talked constantly to the baby. Hello in there, he'd say, face close to Clara's growing belly. This is your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything. How to ride, how to read, how to find the best fishing spots. What if it's a girl? Clara asked, amused. Girls can do all that too, Henry said matter-of-factly. Ma, my first ma, she could ride better than most men. You told me that, Pa. That's true, Jonah agreed. Your mother could do anything she set her mind to. They'd found a balance with Emma's memory, Clara realized. She was part of their story, not a shadow to be feared or avoided, but a cherished piece of their history. October brought unexpected drama. Clara was in the kitchen teaching Henry to bake bread, something he'd requested after watching her, when they heard shots fired. Jonah burst through the door moments later. Get down to the root cellar, he ordered. Now. What's happening? Blackwood's men, they're trying to scatter the cattle. Tom Patterson's been shot. Shot? Clara's hand went to her belly instinctively. He'll live, but this has gone too far. I've sent Pete for the marshal. He grabbed his rifle. Get to the cellar and don't come out until I say. Clara wanted to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She took Henry's hand and they descended into the cool darkness of the root cellar. Are we going to be okay? Henry whispered. Of course we are, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. Your father won't let anything happen to us. They waited in tense silence, hearing occasional shouts and once, terrifyingly, more gunfire. Clara held Henry close, one hand on her belly where the baby kicked, already a fighter. It felt like hours before Jonah called down that it was safe. They emerged to find the yard full of men, neighbors, ranch hands, and importantly, a U.S. Marshal with his deputies. Mrs. Mercer, the Marshal tipped his hat. Your documentation of the Eastern Cattle Company's harassment has been very helpful. We've arrested 3 men, and Blackwood himself is wanted for questioning. Is it over? Clara asked. For now. Men like Blackwood don't give up easy, but he knows we're watching now. Tom Patterson was recovering at his ranch, the bullet having grazed his shoulder rather than doing serious damage. But the incident had shaken everyone. The cooperative organized night watches, men taking turns guarding each other's property. This isn't the life I imagined for you, Jonah said one night as they lay in bed, his hand protective over her belly. What life did you imagine? A peaceful one, safe, not defending our home with guns. Peace is earned in a place like this, Clara said, and safety is something we create together. I knew what I was choosing, Jonah. I chose it anyway. I chose you anyway. November came with early snow and Clara's increasing discomfort. The baby seemed determined to kick its way out. and she could barely sleep for more than an hour at a time. Doc Morrison visited weekly now, concerned about the baby's size. "It's a big one," he said. "Might come early." Emma was early with Henry, Jonah said, worry evident in his voice. "Every pregnancy is different," the doctor assured him. "Your wife is strong and healthy." But Clara could see the fear in Jonah's eyes, the memory of almost losing Emma during Henry's birth, the terror that history might repeat. "I'm not her," Clara said gently after the doctor left. "This is our story, not a repeat of theirs." "I know, I can't lose you, Clara. I can't do that again." "You won't. I'm too stubborn to die." He laughed shakily. "That's true. Most stubborn woman in Wyoming." "Only Wyoming?" "The entire territory." The first labor pains came the day before Thanksgiving. Clara was helping Mrs. Rodriguez prepare food for the holiday when she felt the first contraction, sharp and sudden. "It's starting," Mrs. Rodriguez said, noticing Clara's expression. "It could be false labor." Another contraction cut her off, stronger than the first. "That's not false. Henry!" Mrs. Rodriguez called. "Get your father. Tell him the baby's coming." What followed was controlled chaos. Jonah arrived at a run, face white with panic. The midwife was summoned from town. Henry was sent to fetch hot water and clean linens, giving him something to do with his nervous energy. "It's too early," Jonah kept saying. 3 weeks early." "Babies come when they're ready," the midwife, Mrs. Cooper, said calmly. She'd delivered half the babies in the valley and radiated competence. "This one's just eager to meet you." Labor progressed quickly, too quickly for Clara's comfort. The pains came in waves, each stronger than the last, until she could barely catch her breath between them. "You're doing beautifully," Mrs. Cooper assured her. "Won't be long now." "Jonah," Clara gasped, reaching for him. "I'm here. I'm right here." "If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Promise me you'll take care of the baby. Promise me—" "Clara, stop. You're going to be fine. You're both going to be fine." But she could see the terror in his eyes, the flashback to another birth, another woman in pain. She gripped his hand tighter. "This is different," she said firmly between contractions. "I'm not leaving you." The final stage of labor was a blur of pain and effort. Clara heard Mrs. Cooper's encouraging voice, felt Jonah's hand in hers, and then suddenly, amazingly, a baby's cry filled the room. "It's a girl," Mrs. Cooper announced. "A beautiful, healthy girl." A girl. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as the midwife placed the baby on her chest. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were Jonah's gray. "A daughter," Jonah breathed, touching the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Clara, she's perfect." "Can I come in?" Henry's voice came from outside the door. "Come meet your sister," Clara called. Henry approached slowly, eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small." "You were this small once," Jonah told him. "What's her name?" Clara and Jonah looked at each other. They'd discussed names but hadn't decided. "Rose," Clara said suddenly, "for Emma's roses that survived, for beauty that persists despite hardship." "Rose Catherine Mercer," Jonah agreed, "after both her mothers." Henry beamed. "Hi, Rose. I'm your big brother. I'm going to take care of you forever." As the family gathered around the new addition, Mrs. Rodriguez and the midwife cleaning up quietly in the background, Clara felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Boston. It was harder, more dangerous, more challenging than anything she'd imagined. It was also more wonderful. "Next year," Jonah said softly, "we're having a proper Thanksgiving. No babies, no drama, just family and food." "Don't tempt fate," Clara warned, but she was smiling. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, the house was warm and full of life. A baby's cries, a boy's excited chatter, a man's quiet laughter, a woman's contented sighs. The Eastern Cattle Company would continue their harassment for a few more months before finally being driven off by federal intervention. The ranch would face more challenges, droughts, harsh winters, economic downturns. But the family would face them together, growing stronger with each trial. Rose would grow up strong and wild, as comfortable on horseback as her brother, as stubborn as her mother, and as determined as her father. Henry would become a scholar, eventually attending university in Denver, but always returning to the ranch that was his roots. More children would follow, twin boys named after Jonah's brothers, another daughter with Clara's eyes and Emma's gentle spirit. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this snowy Thanksgiving Eve, they were simply a family gathered around a new life, proof that love could bloom again, even in the harshest ground. "Tell me again about how you came to teach me," Henry would request years later, Rose on his lap, the twins playing at his feet. And Clara would tell the story, how a woman from Boston answered an advertisement to teach a silent boy in Wyoming. How she found not just a student, but a son, not just employment, but love, not just a house, but a home. "And they lived happily ever after?" Rose would always ask at the end. "No," Clara would say, gathering all her children close. "They lived truly ever after. Happiness came and went like the seasons, but love stayed constant as the mountains." The first winter with Rose was both challenging and magical. The baby thrived despite her early arrival, growing round and rosy with Clara's milk and the entire household's devotion. Henry proved to be an exceptional big brother, entertaining Rose for hours with songs and stories, racing to her cradle at her slightest cry. "You're spoiling her," Clara said one morning, finding Henry feeding Rose drops of honey from his finger. "Mrs. Rodriguez said babies like sweet things," Henry defended. "Mrs. Rodriguez also says you like to eat dirt when you were 2, Clara pointed out. "Should we feed Rose dirt?" "That's different," Henry said with 10-year-old logic. The ranch settled into new rhythms. Clara managed the household and the baby while still teaching Henry, though lessons now often included Rose sleeping in a basket beside the desk. Jonah threw himself into improving the ranch, motivated now not just by survival, but by the desire to build something lasting for his growing family. "I want to buy the Patterson place," he announced one evening in January. Tom Patterson, still recovering from his gunshot wound and tired of fighting the Eastern Cattle Company's harassment, had decided to sell and move back east. "Can we afford it?" Clara asked, jiggling Rose, who was fussing. "With the cooperative buying together, we can get a fair price. It would double our grazing land, give us access to year-round water." "Then we should do it," Clara said decisively. "Tom deserves a fair buyer, and we need the security." The purchase was completed by February, making the Mercer Ranch one of the larger spreads in the valley. But with it came more responsibility, more work, and the need for more hands. "We could hire help," Jonah suggested. "Maybe a family, people who need a fresh start like we did." It was Clara who thought of the Kowalskis, Polish immigrants she'd met in town, struggling to find work because of their limited English and foreign ways. "They're good people," she argued, "hard workers, and they have children, playmates for Rose when she's older." Despite some grumbling from the other ranch hands about foreigners, Jonah hired them. The family, Stefan, Anna, and their 3 children moved into the old Patterson house, and within a month had proven their worth 10 times over. Stefan was a gifted horseman, Anna a talented gardener who expanded Clara's vegetable plot into a proper market garden. "We could sell produce in town," Anna suggested in her accented English. "Good money in vegetables, yes?" It was another income stream, another way to diversify and protect against the uncertainties of cattle ranching. Clara and Anna became close friends, bonding over babies and gardens, teaching each other recipes and remedies. Spring brought unexpected joy when Clara received a letter from Boston. Her elderly aunt, her only remaining family, had passed away and left Clara her entire estate. It wasn't a fortune, but the $2,000 was enough to pay off remaining debts and provide a cushion against future hardships. "It's like a blessing from beyond," Clara said, tears in her eyes as she read the letter. "You could go back," Jonah said quietly, "for the funeral, to settle affairs." Clara looked around the kitchen, at Henry doing his mathematics at the table, at Rose sleeping in her cradle, at Jonah himself trying to hide his fear that she might not return. "There's nothing for me there," she said firmly. "Everything I love is here." Relief flooded his face, and he pulled her into his arms. "I know you gave up a lot to come here, to stay here." "I gave up nothing. I gained everything." The money from her aunt's estate went partly to the ranch and partly to something Clara had been dreaming of, a school, a proper school for all the valley's children, not just Henry. Education matters, she argued at the cooperative meeting. Our children deserve better than scattered home teaching. Who would teach? Bill Crawford asked. I would to start, but we could hire a proper teacher eventually, someone young and eager like... She paused, smiling. Like I was. The school was built that summer, a simple one-room building with proper desks, a good stove for winter, and windows that let in plenty of light. Clara taught 3 days a week, with mothers taking turns watching Rose and the other young children. Henry was her star pupil, of course, but he was challenged by the Kowalski children and several others from neighboring ranches. The classroom became a melting pot of backgrounds and languages, children teaching each other as much as Clara taught them. The autumn of Rose's first year brought changes that would reshape the valley forever. The Eastern Cattle Company, after months of legal pressure and federal investigation, finally withdrew from the region entirely. Blackwood himself was arrested in Denver on charges of conspiracy and destruction of property. The news arrived on a crisp September morning while Clara was teaching at the schoolhouse, Rose playing in a basket at her feet while Henry helped the younger children with their letters. They got him, Jonah said, bursting through the door with a telegram in hand. Blackwood's been arrested, 5 years in federal prison. The classroom erupted in cheers. These children had lived under the shadow of the Eastern Cattle Company's threat, had seen their parents worry and struggle. Now that shadow was lifting. Does this mean we're safe now, Mrs. Mercer? Little Mary Kowalski asked, her English much improved after months in Clara's classroom. Safer, Clara said carefully. But we must always be vigilant, and we must remember what kept us safe, standing together, helping each other. That evening, the entire valley celebrated. Every ranch family gathered at the Mercer place, bringing food and instruments. Old Pete's fiddle was joined by Stefan's accordion and someone's guitar. Children ran wild through the yard while adults danced and laughed with the relief of people who'd survived a siege. You did this, Tom Patterson told Clara. He'd returned for the celebration, looking healthier than he had in years, away from the stress of fighting Blackwood. Your idea of the cooperative, your documentation, you saved this valley. We all saved it, Clara corrected, but she was smiling as Jonah spun her around the makeshift dance floor, Rose secure in Henry's careful arms nearby. As winter approached, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the knowledge came with less fear and more quiet joy. She knew what to expect now, knew her body could do this miraculous thing. Another baby? Henry asked when they told him, his face lighting up. Rose needs a playmate. Babies aren't playmates right away, Clara reminded him. Remember how small Rose was? But they grow, Henry said confidently, and I'll teach this one too, just like I'm teaching Rose. Indeed, Henry had appointed himself Rose's primary educator, constantly talking to her, showing her things, celebrating every tiny milestone. When she first rolled over, he ran shouting through the house. When she babbled "Mama, Ma," he insisted she was saying Mama, specifically, and spent hours trying to teach her to say Henry. The second pregnancy progressed more smoothly than the first. Clara knew now how to manage the ranch work while growing a baby, knew when to rest and when to push through discomfort. The community of women that had formed around the school provided support and advice, sharing remedies for morning sickness and recipes for strength-building foods. You're carrying different this time, Mrs. Rodriguez observed in February, studying Clara's belly with an expert eye. Lower. It's a boy. You can't know that from looking, Clara laughed. 50 years of watching pregnant women, I know. Mark my words, a boy. Whether through luck or wisdom, Mrs. Rodriguez was right. On a mild April morning, with wildflowers blooming across the valley and Rose taking her first wobbling steps, Clara delivered a son. The labor was shorter this time, though no less intense, and Jonah's fear was tempered by experience. A boy, Mrs. Cooper announced, placing the squalling infant in Clara's arms, big and healthy. They named him Thomas, after Tom Patterson, who had become a dear friend, and James, for Clara's father. Thomas James Mercer came into the world with his mother's blue eyes and his father's stubborn chin, and a cry that could wake the entire ranch. He's loud, Henry observed, covering his ears as Thomas wailed. So were you, Jonah told him. Your mother used to say you were practicing to be a town crier. The mention of Emma came easily now, woven into their family stories without pain. She was part of their history, part of what had shaped them into who they were. Life with 2 babies and a growing boy was chaotic but joyful. Clara somehow managed to continue teaching 3 days a week, bringing both babies to the schoolhouse where the older girls helped watch them during lessons. The classroom became an extended family, children of all ages learning not just reading and arithmetic, but how to care for each other. This isn't a proper school, a visitor from the Territorial Education Board said disapprovingly, watching as lessons paused for Clara to nurse Thomas, while Mary Kowalski led the younger children in recitation. No, Clara agreed cheerfully. It's better. These children are learning that education doesn't stop for life. It incorporates it. The official left shaking his head, but the parents of the valley knew better. Their children were thriving, not just academically, but as human beings. The older children helped the younger, the English speakers helped the immigrants, and everyone learned that different didn't mean less than. That summer brought a drought that tested everyone's resilience. The streams ran low, grass turned brown, and cattle had to be moved constantly to find adequate grazing. The cooperative proved its worth again as ranchers shared water resources and worked together to dig new wells. We might lose some cattle, Jonah said grimly one evening, studying the cloudless sky. But not the ranch, Clara said firmly. We have savings now, we have the cooperative, we have each other. When did you become such an optimist? When I realized that pessimism never planted a seed or raised a child, she replied, shifting Thomas to her other hip while Rose clung to her skirts. The drought broke in September with torrential rains that turned the dry earth to mud, but saved the remaining grass and refilled the streams. They'd lost some cattle, but fewer than they'd feared, and the cooperative's shared resources meant no single ranch bore the full burden. It was during this time that Henry, now 12 and tall for his age, began showing an interest that surprised everyone: medicine. It started when one of the ranch hands was badly injured by a spooked horse, and Doc Morrison needed help treating him. Hold this, the doctor ordered, and Henry held bandages and instruments with steady hands, watching intently as the doctor stitched and splinted. You've got good hands for this work, Doc Morrison told him afterward. Steady, calm. Ever think about being a doctor? Could I? Henry asked, wonder in his voice. I mean, I'm supposed to take over the ranch. You're supposed to be who you're meant to be, Jonah said firmly when Henry brought it up at dinner. The ranch will be here whether you're a doctor or not. But it's your legacy, Henry protested. You're my legacy, Jonah corrected. You and your siblings. The ranch is just land and cattle. You're what matters. Clara watched this exchange with tears in her eyes, remembering the silent, grieving boy she'd met 2 years ago. Now Henry was confident, articulate, full of dreams and possibilities. That winter, Doc Morrison began taking Henry with him on calls, teaching him basic medical knowledge. Henry absorbed it all like a sponge, coming home excited about setting bones and diagnosing ailments. He delivered Mrs. Crawford's baby today, Clara told Jonah one evening. Well, assisted. Doc Morrison says he's a natural. Our son the doctor, Jonah said with pride. Emma would be so proud. She would, Clara agreed, then added softly, I'm proud too. I know. And Henry knows. He told me the other day that he's lucky. Most kids have one mother who believes in them, but he has 2. Spring of 1878 brought news that would change their lives again. The Transcontinental Railroad was planning a spur line through the valley, which would mean easier transport for cattle and goods, but also an influx of strangers and change. Progress, some called it. Destruction, said others. Opportunity, Clara said firmly at the cooperative meeting, if we're smart about it. She proposed that the cooperative buy land around the proposed station site, controlling development and ensuring that the growth benefited local ranchers rather than outside speculators. That would take all our reserve funds, Bill Crawford pointed out. It's an investment. The land will triple in value once the railroad comes through. It was a risk, but the cooperative voted to trust Clara's vision. They purchased 40 acres around the planned station, parceling it out for a stockyard, a granary, and other businesses that would serve the ranching community. The railroad arrived that summer with great fanfare. The first train brought lumber and supplies, but also newcomers, merchants, craftsmen, and unfortunately less savory characters looking to exploit the boom. One of these was a man named Daniel Preston, who opened a saloon and gambling house that quickly became a source of trouble. Ranch hands lost their wages, fights broke out, and Preston himself seemed to have designs on more than just selling whiskey. That school land would make a fine spot for expansion, he told Clara one day when she was in town for supplies, his eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. The school land isn't for sale, Clara said coldly. Everything's for sale, pretty lady. Just a matter of price. Or pressure. That night, Clara told Jonah about the encounter. His face darkened dangerously. I'll have a word with Preston. No, Clara said firmly. That's what he wants, to provoke a fight. Maybe get you arrested or hurt. We need to be smarter. Their solution came from an unexpected source, the women of the valley. Led by Clara and Anna Kowalski, they organized a temperance movement, not to ban alcohol entirely, but to regulate the saloons and gambling houses. They petitioned the territorial government, documenting the problems Preston's establishment was causing. You're meddling in men's business, Preston warned Clara when he learned of the petition. I'm protecting our community, Clara replied steadily. And if you threaten me or any other woman in this valley, you'll learn that Wyoming women don't back down. The petition succeeded. New regulations forced Preston to clean up his operation or close down. He chose to leave, but not before making one last attempt at intimidation. Clara was alone at the schoolhouse one evening, preparing lessons, when Preston entered uninvited. You've cost me a lot of money, he said, moving closer. Clara's hand went to the drawer where she kept Jonah's old Navy Colt, a gift he'd insisted she carry after the Blackwood troubles. Step back, Mr. Preston. Or what? You'll shoot me? He laughed. Proper lady like you? Clara pulled out the gun, cocking it in one smooth motion. I'm a rancher's wife, Mr. Preston. I've birthed babies, buried the dead, and faced down worse men than you. I can put a bullet through your shoulder at this distance, and any jury in Wyoming would call it justified. Now get out. Preston stared at her for a long moment, then backed away. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Clara said steadily. Be on tomorrow's train, or I'll have the marshal arrest you for trespassing and attempted assault. He left that night, and the valley breathed easier. But the incident had taught Clara something important. The frontier was changing, but it still required strength and courage to protect what mattered. That fall, another change came in the form of a letter from Denver. A publishing house had heard about Clara's innovative teaching methods and wanted her to write a book about education on the frontier. They want to publish your ideas? Jonah asked, reading the letter with amazement. Apparently someone from the territorial board wrote about our school. Despite his disapproval, others found it interesting. You should do it, Henry said eagerly. You could help teachers everywhere. Clara did write the book that winter, working by lamplight after the children were asleep. Education Beyond Walls, Teaching in the American West, would eventually be published and become influential in rural education reform. But that winter, it was just another project, another way Clara was building something larger than just their individual lives. Rose at 2 was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, toddling after Henry, trying to do everything he did. Thomas, approaching his first birthday, was calmer but determined, pulling himself up on furniture and studying the world with serious gray eyes. He's going to be the thoughtful one, Clara predicted, watching Thomas carefully stack blocks while Rose knocked them down. Like his mother, Jonah said, pulling her close. I was thinking like his father. You're the one who thinks everything through. Only learned that after making too many mistakes. They were interrupted by Henry bursting through the door. Ma! Pa! Come quick! Mrs. Patterson's in labor, and Doc Morrison's 20 miles away at the Johnson Ranch. Clara grabbed the medical bag she'd assembled over the years. Henry, ride for the midwife. Jonah, bring hot water and clean linens to the Patterson place. The birth was complicated. The baby was turned wrong, and Mrs. Patterson was exhausted from hours of labor. Clara had assisted at several births now, but this required more. I can turn the baby, Henry said quietly. Doc Morrison taught me. My hands are smaller. Clara met his eyes, seeing not a boy, but a young man ready to take responsibility. Do it. With careful instruction from Clara and incredible composure for a 12-year-old, Henry successfully turned the baby, The child was born healthy and screaming 20 minutes later. You saved them both, Mrs. Patterson wept, holding her new son. Henry, you're going to be a wonderful doctor. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, Clara looked around the table. At Jonah, weathered but strong. At Henry, growing into a remarkable young man. At Rose, chattering nonsense with great enthusiasm. At Thomas, solemnly gnawing on a piece of bread, and felt a wave of contentment so powerful it took her breath away. You all right? Jonah asked, noticing her expression. More than all right, Clara said. I was just thinking about when I first arrived. I came to teach one quiet boy. I never imagined all this. Disappointed? Jonah teased. Never. Not for one moment. As 1878 turned to 1879, the valley continued to grow and change. The railroad brought prosperity but also challenges. The school expanded to 2 rooms and hired a second teacher, though Clara remained the head instructor. The ranch thrived under Jonah's management and Clara's innovations. They'd added sheep as she'd suggested, and the wool provided steady income even when cattle prices fluctuated. Henry, now 13, spent half his time studying with Doc Morrison and half helping on the ranch. He'd grown tall like his father, but had his mother Emma's fine features and Clara's determined spirit. Rose was 3, a tiny force of nature who insisted on doing everything herself and had strong opinions about everything from the color of her dress to the names of the barn cats. Thomas, approaching 2, was indeed the thoughtful one, observing everything with those serious eyes before carefully attempting new things. We need to think about their education, Clara said one evening. Henry's almost ready for more than I can teach him. If he's going to be a doctor, he'll need proper schooling. Denver? Jonah asked, though the thought of Henry leaving clearly pained him. Eventually. But there's a new academy starting in Cheyenne. He could go for secondary education, come home for holidays. I don't want to leave, Henry protested. Everything I love is here, and it always will be, Clara assured him. But sometimes we have to leave what we love to become who we're meant to be. You have a gift, Henry. It would be wrong not to develop it. The discussion continued for weeks, but eventually Henry agreed to at least visit the academy. The trip to Cheyenne that spring was an adventure. Clara, Jonah, and all 3 children taking the train, staying in a hotel, seeing the wider world. The academy was impressive, with proper laboratories and a library that made Henry's eyes widen with longing. The headmaster, after testing Henry, offered him not just admission, but a partial scholarship. Your son is exceptional, he told Clara and Jonah. His education has been unconventional but thorough. You've prepared him well. His mother, both his mothers, deserve the credit, Jonah said with pride. The decision was made. Henry would start at the academy in the fall, returning home for Christmas and summers. It was progress, necessary but bittersweet. That summer was precious, knowing it was the last with all of them together daily. They took picnics to the creek, rode to the high pastures, spent evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Emma's roses bloomed more beautifully than ever, and Clara cut bouquets for the house, their fragrance filling the rooms with sweetness. Tell us the story, Rose demanded one evening, climbing into Clara's lap. It had become a family tradition, the story of how Clara came to Wyoming. Once upon a time, Clara began, as she always did, a teacher from Boston answered an advertisement. To teach a boy who wouldn't talk, Henry continued, grinning. And she was scared of horses, Jonah added. But she was brave, Rose said firmly. The bravest lady ever. She was brave, Clara agreed, but she found people who were braver. A boy who found his voice again. A man who learned to love again. And together they made a family, Thomas shouted, one of his few but emphatic words. Yes, Clara said, gathering them all close. A family. The night before Henry left for school, Clara found him in Emma's garden, now truly Clara's garden, but somehow always both, sitting among the roses. Scared? She asked, sitting beside him. Terrified, he admitted. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not smart enough? Do you remember when you first started talking again? You were terrified then too, but you did it anyway. That was different. You were there. I'm still here. I'll always be here, even when you're there. She touched his chest over his heart. Right here, Me and your pa and Emma and Rose and Thomas, you carry us all with you." Henry leaned against her, and for a moment he was just her little boy again, seeking comfort. "Ma, Clara Ma, thank you for everything, for coming here, for staying, for believing in me." "Thank you," Clara said, tears in her eyes, "for letting me be your mother." The next morning at the train station, Henry stood tall in his new clothes, trying to look mature and confident. Rose clung to his legs, crying and demanding he stay. Thomas solemnly handed him a smooth stone he'd found, his version of a going-away gift. Jonah shook his hand man to man, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. Clara kissed his forehead, whispered, "Make us proud," though she was already so proud she could burst. As the train pulled away, Henry hanging out the window, waving until he was just a speck, Clara felt Jonah's arm around her shoulders. "He'll be back," Jonah said. "I know, but he'll be different. This is the beginning of him becoming who he's meant to be." "Are you sad?" "Yes, and happy, and proud, and terrified." "So, you're a mother," Jonah said with a slight smile. "Yes," Clara laughed through her tears. "I'm a mother." They returned to the ranch to find life continuing, chores to do, children to tend, a school to run. But there was an Henry-shaped hole in their daily rhythm that took time to adjust to. Letters came weekly from Cheyenne, full of excitement about his studies, homesickness, determination to succeed. Claire read them aloud at dinner, and even Rose and Thomas listened, missing their brother. "He sounds happy," Jonah said after one particularly enthusiastic letter about anatomy class. "He sounds like he's where he belongs," Clara corrected. "There's a difference, but it's a good one." That fall brought unexpected news. Clara was pregnant again. At 31, with 2 small children and a school to run, the prospect was daunting but welcome. "Another baby?" Rose asked suspiciously when told. "We already have Thomas." "Thomas would like a playmate," Clara explained. "I'm his playmate." "You're his big sister. That's even more important." The pregnancy was harder this time. Clara's body protesting the demands of carrying a child, while caring for 2 others and teaching. Mrs. Rodriguez and Anna Kowalski took over more of the household duties, the community of women rallying around her as they always did for each other. Winter came early and harsh, snow falling by late October and not letting up. Henry made it home for Christmas, barely, his train delayed by blizzards. He looked older, more confident, full of stories about his studies and friends. "It's amazing, Ma," he told Clara as they decorated the tree. "There's so much to learn. Doc Morrison taught me a lot, but this is different, scientific, precise." "You don't want to come home," Clara said, not a question. "I do. But I also want to be there. Is that wrong?"